Hello, darling hearts. GAPS coach Emma here. I'm so lucky to be joined by Meredith Leigh today, the author of the Ethical Meat Handbook. I've been looking for a butcher or someone to talk to about meat for so long, and everyone sort of like tiptoes around the subject and doesn't really want to get into it. But I see from the blurb in your book that you teach people how to raise animals and butcher them and cook and cure their meats. And it's all about nutrition, the environmental impact, ethics, and sustainability. That slightly scary word that the WHO and the UN have usurped and given us these sustainable development goals, which are sort of slightly, they have got another agenda. But we're using what we can, aren't we, to raise awareness. So lovely to meet you, Meredith, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Me too. Now, you were just telling me, which is something I didn't know, that you have something called Fermentation School, www.fermentationschool.com, which is teaching people online how to culture and cultivate the gardens of their microbiome using the food as the medicine, which is what I do. So how did that come about, and how long's that been going, and how's it going?
So it's been about a year and a half, so it's pretty young, but basically it came about with the pandemic. A lot of fellow authors and teachers and people who are advocates in this space, we were having to pivot, obviously, because a lot of the live instruction and retreats and workshops, as you know, were being not allowed because we couldn't gather. And so, honestly, I think it was a good thing, because we have been asked for many, many years by many of our audience members to put things online to make them more accessible in that way, because the audience for this, as you know, is global. And sometimes having an intimate retreat is like the way to connect and create community around these things and like really radically move things forward. But also like getting the message out to as many people as possible requires some kind of virtual experience. So you're obviously savvy to this, much more so than I am. So we started going down this road like early March of 2021. I don't know when it was. To put our own stuff online, and we were like marching forward with this, putting our stuff online, and then realizing how difficult it is to make your voice heard on the internet. There's just like so much noise, and we were like, wait a minute, why are we doing this each ourselves, like in isolation, like trying to build this awareness or have this website hosted or whatever? And so we were like, what if we just collaborate and make one platform where specifically women can come together and host an online course and get paid to share their knowledge. And so that became the Fermentation School. It's just essentially this project to create a hive of accessible resources and education on fermentation, but also to like support, elevate, and pay women to teach that information. And so it's great. It's creating a lot of awesome community that I think a lot of times we're like, oh my gosh, we have this community energy, and what are we going to do with it? Now, what are we going to do with it? And we are very slowly learning like the way that people operate online. Like, how do people do online learning? What makes it valuable for them? How do you create a community virtually? Like, so many questions have surfaced that are all really fun to think about. But it is challenging. It's rewarding and challenging. And I think, every day is just like another opportunity to like reach more people, bring more folks into the community, understand like how we keep this alive and keep it growing for anybody who needs it and wants it.
Priceless, absolutely brilliant work. I love it how you've collaborated, because I was in exactly the same boat. I was a smallholder. I had a community supported agriculture scheme. I was doing 20 veg boxes a week. I had done for 10 years. I had encouraged everybody to come on a Tuesday to learn about permaculture, biodynamics, natural farming. We kept a flock of laying hens that was run cooperatively. So 14 families shared the care of the hens, and would come and collect their eggs once every 2 weeks and change the water and feed the chicken scraps and their whatever. We bred pigs, we bred sheep. It was a wonderful community cohesive experiment in 0 miles to market, low carbon, learning resource and food producing thing. But the powers that be came down on us like a ton of bricks because we couldn't live on the land to do this project. And in England, the planning laws are drastically draconian. But that was when I realized that the so-called powers that be do not actually have our best interests at heart. And then at the beginning of the so-called lockdown, when my daughter came home from school and said, "Mum, we've been locked down," I went, "What on earth do you mean? What they've sent you home from school because what?" And I was straight on the phone to the school going, "What are you doing? Don't be so ridiculous. Open the doors immediately and don't be so silly." You know, I just refused to take on board. But then, of course, I was in your shoes and I was like, oh, right. So that 10 years of work I did on the land, suddenly I just said, right, okay, now you lot can do it. Because suddenly everyone was desperate to get on the land. So I said, okay, you lot do it. So 30 families came together to run it collectively. And I just I just stepped away completely and began the food as medicine mission that I'm on with the GAPS protocol as a GAPS coach, teaching people online. So I know what it's like. But I kind of did I'm going to do it all on my own thing. So I've just been
I think that's like really patterned in us, you know, that we have to like do it individually. And
I think that's
especially with women, you know, and it's
trauma.
like, yeah, I think so. It's like it's patriarchy all the way, if you ask me. Like, you know, it's more helpful to each individual if we're collectively thriving, right? And we're working together to lift each other up. And so, yeah.
And what better way than to try and help those who feed the family, those who are going to be putting the food on the table. Such a key role to get these ancient cooking principles and techniques back into our kitchen vocabulary, because that's how we preserve, isn't it? It's how we, without a fridge. Right. What did we do before the age of the fridge? Fermentation. You know, there's no such, you don't need preservatives when you've got lactoferments, and it's so exciting. So what I'd really love you to tell us a little bit about is cured meats. I've often thought about that word, cured, because it's like the cure, you know, to make you better. Or why do we say cured meats?
That's a great question. I mean, I feel like there's a big vocabulary project going on with preserved meats in general, because like in places in Europe, for example, you're in France right now, charcuterie is the umbrella term for all these meats that are like either smoked, salted, or dehydrated, or a combination of these in order to make them shelf stable. And then in Italy, salumi is the umbrella word for all these preparations. But in the United States, we don't have like that level of vocabulary about it. And so we just say cured meats, which can be a little bit confusing because sometimes the curing process, or what we properly refer to the curing process, doesn't actually bring the item all the way to shelf stability. And so I would really love to have a different vocabulary word than just cured meats for talking about all of these preparations, but that's what we work with. That's what people sort of understand. And so I don't think it's in the popular consciousness that they are curing anything, because as you said, the World Health Organization and many other entities are trying to convince people that these types of foods are bad for their health, will definitely give them cancer, which I have tons of opinions on, you know, what sort of additives and preservatives and colorants and dyes are in those, and sugars are in those products that are actually making people sick. And it's not necessarily the process of preserving meat in and of itself, that can be done very purely and ancestrally, as you say, and people have been doing it for centuries all over the world.
Exactly.
So that's part of my work, is like just like sort of demystifying all of this, making it more accessible, making it more understandable to people, and helping us understand that like as part of making meat a more sensible part of our like agricultural and nutritional ecosystem, like we have to take back some of these like levels of consciousness about meat preservation, or about death, or about, you know, all the things that have been like twisted up in our minds and bodies about like what it is to eat animals. Like that's basically like everything that I handle and talk about constantly.
And we need to, because there's
Agreed.
so much brainwashing going on. The vegan agenda, as I call it, I've seen so many people get damaged by trying to do the right thing. They think they're doing the right thing. And,
sure, yeah.
I mean, I don't hold it against them. I've had really good friends of mine, and I've had vegan mamas trying to bring up vegan babies who their baby teeth have gone black, and then I've helped them have that paradigm shift about the cycle of life and how we're going to be worm food one day, and that everything is food for something. And that when we treat the animals with respect and work with them as co-workers on the land, that actually they're strengthening the web of life, and there will be some products, there will be some leftovers, there will be something for us, and we honor the animals by incorporating that into the cycle of life. And I've had their baby teeth, you know, when they've got the chicken stock on and they've brought the good fats in, and their baby teeth, blackened baby teeth fall out to reveal beautiful pearly whites. You know, so we can totally regenerate.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So what did I want to speak to you about? Oh yeah, the additives. These, what is it? Potassium nitrate, sodium nitrate.
Sodium nitrite.
What makes these so bad for us, and what do we use instead?
Well, the issue with nitrites is actually when they are heated to produce nitrosamine. So nitrite itself, like, it's not something you would eat. You would never eat. I mean, you do when you eat celery, or when you eat leafy greens that are grown specifically in like low light conditions, like if they're overwintered, for example, they have high concentrations of nitrite in their stems, which is why, you know, products are cured naturally with celery juice extracts, because it has like a high level inherently of sodium nitrite.
Crikey. So all of that medical medium stuff where they've been telling us to drink celery juice is actually preserving our insides, is it?
Well, it's actually like, you know, you might be just metabolizing it in your body to nitric oxide, which, I mean, maybe there's some like offshoots, like nitric oxide's good, right?
It's a happy,
we get it when we look at the sun, it's a happy thing, right?
Yeah.
So the question is like, what are the metabolic sort of products, right, of taking that nitrite down into nitric oxide, like inside of your body? What we know with like cured meats, for example, that are preserved. So the purpose of using nitrite in curing meats is to inhibit botulism. So what it does is it comes into contact with Clostridium botulinum, which is the bacterium that produces botulism toxin via its spores, not actually itself. So it's confusing. It's like you don't get botulism from the actual bacterium, Clostridium botulinum, you get it from the spore and the toxin that spore produces, and it makes you sick. It kind of paralyzes you from the waist up. It's a pretty awful way to go. It's colorless, odorless, and flavorless. So you can't detect that it's in your foods, but it is like produced in, you know, Clostridium botulinum really likes environments that are anaerobic, so no oxygen, and slightly low pH, so a little bit acidic, which is a lot of preserved foods, right? Like we're talking about, you know, acidic canned products, but that aren't so acidic that they automatically eliminate botulism from thriving. So low acid canned foods, as well as meats that are actually being preserved in such a way that is drawing down that pH gradually over time, which is what's happening with a lot of salamis and like prosciuttos and other cured meat items. And so the nitrite is in there for a purpose, so that when that Clostridium botulinum comes into contact with it, it goes, oh gosh, I really don't like this environment. There's this thing here that's not going to allow me to thrive. And so it just creates a protective membrane around itself that means it won't die, but also means it won't reproduce, and then you won't get the toxin, right? So what we know about meats that are preserved with the nitrite that are never ever cooked is that actually the fermentation that you're encouraging in those products and all the other ways that you're bringing them to shelf stability, there is a biological interaction, you know, with microbes going on in that salami that's actually reducing the nitrite into nitric oxide, right? So you're actually like, they're pretty harmless to you, these products, if they're made, you know, properly, which we can get into in a minute, you know, like all the ways that the process is monkeyed with in order to make it like more industrially friendly or fast, or to sort of mimic like an old world preserved meat product. But if we actually like really look back to like, what are the origins of doing this ancestrally, like people are being responsive to their environments in their practice, they're using pure ingredients. And what we see is that whether it's potassium nitrate, whether it's sodium nitrate, sodium nitrite, you know, this cooperation with microbes in fermentation and curing, you know, takes that nitrite product into nitric oxide, and we can take it into our bodies, you know.
Right.
The issue is really with cured meats that are cured with a nitrite that are then cooked. So we're talking about bacon, we're talking about like sandwich hams that are mass produced by the industry. There's a requirement, especially in the United States, and I don't necessarily know what the regulations are in other countries. Very often in Europe and other places, there is a memory of ancestral foods and a memory of cultural preservation techniques. And so the food system is not as highly regulated as it is in the United States. This is one of my like soapboxes, but basically like in the US, I can speak from my experience, it is a requirement that any like commercially produced hams or bacons have to include a sodium nitrite product, even though those products are going to be cooked, and very often cooked above boiling point for more than 20 minutes, which is a process that we know kills botulism toxin.
Right. So then they don't
it's
need
like
the
they don't really
sodium
need
nitrate.
it,
Yeah.
but we can't ensure that every process is going to be, I guess, like the regulators can't assure that every process is going to be trustable. So they say, okay, we've got to have this like nitrite product included, and then the customer either at the factory or whatever the processing facility, that item is cooked, which then produces nitrosamine, which is a free radical, which is a known carcinogen, or the customer's taking that product home and then cooking it and producing nitrosamine. So it's complicated, but it's important to talk about, because I think if we just like vilify nitrite, in this blanket way, it's not very constructive, because in products that are preserved completely to shelf stability and never cooked, it's quite important to have that in there to prevent the botulism. Are there ways to do it without it? Absolutely. People were doing that before they figured out how to isolate, potassium nitrite or sodium nitrite. But can we ensure that, everybody is going to find that perfect synergy of like pH and water activity and all the things that are required to inhibit botulism without the nitrite? No, that's pretty hard. That's pretty advanced. So in my mind, I'm like, I want to make this practice of preserving meats as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, so people can take back food and have more food freedom. And so what I say is the use of nitrite is really conditional based on what your process is going to be. If you're going to be preserving meat that you're never cooking, I recommend you include it. But if you are going to be cooking the meat above boiling point for more than 20 minutes, then you get to evaluate with the knowledge that you now have through coming to my classes or whatever, reading the books, whether or not you need to include it and whether it's safe. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer.
Thank you. No,
but
that's really answered lots of questions for me, because it's the same with most things. It's never black and white. It's never
Right.
one thing or the other. There's always so many variations, variables. And I've been encouraging people to just relax about the whole fermentation thing, because they're always thinking they're going to kill themselves when they let things go
it's
off.
pretty hard to do. Like I think if you were to go into it blind and be like, oh my God, nitrate's the devil, you might kill yourself. You might give yourself botulism. But like in general, like the guidelines that are out there, the instruction that's being provided is really helpful. You're given a container to where you're like, okay, I can take the best of modern science, with sort of this like primal intuition that I cultivate through learning about this stuff, and put those things together and use my senses. And it's really difficult to even make yourself sick, I think, if you go in with that sort of mentality and you're open and to experimentation, and you're in community with people. So you know where to go to ask questions, know where to go to like test some of your theories.
And everyone I know who's experimented with fermentation in the end has come out feeling one heck of a lot better, having incorporated it into their diet. And I always tell people about Sandor Kantz, the granddaddy of lacto-fermented vegetables, with his wonderful books, and how apparently he has a diagnosis of HIV, I think, but it doesn't seem to have bothered him in the slightest, because he just got on with it and fed himself properly. So yeah, the food is medicine. So do you have a sort of a quick, easy starter project for people if they want to ferment some or cure some meat at home? Would it be fermented meat? How would you go about getting somebody started on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general for people, it's probably whole muscle that's going to be the easiest thing. So like making a ham, making bacon, making like a beef brisole. So that might be something nice for people who want to try to do a little bit of a natural process, would be getting like a cut of beef, and you would salt it. And so salt is this like essential, that's the curing process basically, where we're initially drawing down the water that's in the cells of the meat so that there's less water available to microbes to either rancidify it or ferment it, right? So we're trying to just slowly dehydrate it over time, which is the truth with any preserved food, like dried mangoes or dried beef. You're trying to bring down that water activity. And so the salt helps us because it pulls out via osmosis water from inside the cells of the meat to the outside of the meat, because nature wants an equal concentration of salts on either side of the membrane. So salt is that first step, along with other spices. And then, after a certain amount of time, that meat can just be hung up into a relatively like stable situation. I mean, I can give a recipe if you want. I don't really know what you're looking for here, but that's typically like one of the easiest things for people to tackle first, is like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna like put some salt on a piece of meat. I'm gonna stick it in the fridge for like 3 days per kilo. And then I'm going to rinse it off, wrap it in like muslin or something, hang it up in, a basement or a cellar, or it depends on where you live. You may have a perfect environment for it, where you are. Or you may have to create something, rig something up, which can be fun. And then you're sort of like looking for it to just essentially lose about 30 to 40% of its weight from the time that you started to when you know that it's kind of ready. And then you're pulling it down and slicing it, and you've made your first, really simple,
and this has
really
preserved the meat without a fridge. And how long can we expect to be able to keep a piece of preserved meat like that? Because lots of people are talking about prepping these days, aren't they? Lots of people are thinking, oh, I need to get... And for me, we need to prep animal products if we're going to survive, because we can grow a few veg, but people don't have access maybe necessarily to fresh meats. So people might be thinking about wanting to preserve their own meats. So how long could we expect to be able to keep a piece of meat that we had dehydrated ourselves like that?
Well, something like that you had brought to shelf stability would keep indefinitely. I mean, you could just hang it back up and then slice more off of it later. It would continue to get more dry and more hard, obviously, but that's basically that process of drying meat in a suitable environment, like that has a moderate level of humidity and a relatively cool temperature. Then, it's bringing it to shelf stability. Now, in places like in the world where the humidity is super high, like I live in a place that's a temperate rainforest, so the humidity is very high. And so in environments like this, that's where people developed smoking, meat smoking, because then you're either drying the meat in wood smoke, which has a low pH, it has antimicrobial, antibacterial properties. And so you're basically able to use the smoke to create an environment that is preservative and protective. And then over time, the meat is coming to shelf stability, and dehydrating essentially enough and losing that water activity. In some places, we're actually cooking the meat with fire, after the curing process, so that it's got a lower water activity, it's semi-preserved, and then it's cooked. And so there's lots, like within this umbrella of like preserved meat, there's lots of different approaches. Most of them arise from like what the climate was like where people were living, and like what resources they had available to them, so it's definitely worth, I think, like checking out the book or checking out the online courses, to sort of see like, okay, what's the process? But my approach to teaching is very much like, okay, here's your parameters, here's your containers. This is the science of what's happening inside the muscle cells, inside the meat. These are the conditions that you want to create, and really foundational information that you can then take and run with, sort of whatever works for you within your context,
That's what I'm encouraging people to do, is to work intuitively with principles rather than follow strict recipes. Because
that's right.
When I was brain fogged and couldn't think straight, when I was toxic and my children were suffering and I started on my GAPS journey, I could hardly string 2 words together and put one foot in front of the other, let alone follow a recipe.
Wow.
So it really needs to be simple, easy, quick, like you say, some parameters that you work with. I love it. So how did you what's your story, Meredith, going back? I mean, how did you get into curing meats? And
That's a great question. It's been a long road. I'm actually working on an ebook right now that's about my journey and like how my mentality changed over time, because I actually started out vegan and like, came just this very like interesting journey towards farming, and then from farming like realizing we needed animals in the ecosystem in order to bring fertility in, and like all these other things, the animals provide to a farming system, as you know. And then having to grapple with that and realize that like we were going to have to harvest some of these animals, and what did that mean and how did I feel about it? And then actually realizing that the animals were the most successful sort of enterprise within our system. And so we ended up specializing in animals, and then realizing that we had this big bottleneck around processing, like slaughtering the animals and making sausages and everything. We were completely dependent on a third party to do that. And so we decided to open a butcher shop and start doing some of that ourselves. And then being in the butcher shop, not only processing my own animals, but also bringing in animals from other farmers and seeing like the difference in the quality of the meat and the fat based on like the feed was just fascinating to me. So that's when I started going down the rabbit hole of like, the butchery process, like learning to read the meat and really understand like how this meat tells us a story about what's going on with the land and what's going on with like the supply chain. And one of the things that became super apparent to me, and that is that like we really can't get people to understand how to eat the whole animal and value the whole animal, and we can't like sell the whole animal before it rots, essentially, without some kind of preservation. And so it all was very organic for me, essentially, in coming like from the production side, raising animals, trying to understand how to put together the right like synergy of production practices that produce like a really nutritious, meat product with good quality fat, and then like bringing it up into like, how does the butchery process inform that? Like how are butchers like indispensable to this process? And then like what sort of curing practice is necessary in order to make all of it sort of come together. So really just like piecing together all parts of the supply chain. And then I lost my farm and my shop and my restaurant in a divorce. And I was sort of left to be like, oh gosh, what am I going to do with all this like knowledge and passion that I have for this? And so I decided to write the Ethical Meat Handbook. And that's really just my attempt to like put a 300,000 foot view on the whole supply chain to help people understand like, okay, we have this like huge, awful food system. Like there's so many things wrong with it. It's not just about meat. Like there's issues with every food group. There's issues with every way that we're doing food, but how can we come from this like really controversial lens of meat and dairy and like just start jumping off into all of the issues, from this like really zoomed out perspective, and understand, this is one of our toughest issues. It's one of our toughest foods to like wrap our brains around and like understand. And so it felt like a good entry point for advocacy and education.
Brilliant. So yeah, when I had my small holding, I took my lambs to, you see, in the UK, you're not allowed to sell your meat if it hasn't gone through an official government abattoir.
Yeah.
But the official
same
government, the official government abattoirs don't do things right in my eyes, because, well, just give you a small, for instance, I spent my, a couple of years loving my animals, feeding them the absolute best, making sure they had access to the best water, the salt lick, I pampered them. And then when the offal came back with the carcasses, it wasn't their offal. It wasn't my lamb's livers. It was way too big and way too of a funny color, and I didn't like the look of it. It was not this. It was not my animal's offal. That was why I grew the animals, so that I could have the offal, and they didn't give it me back. They don't give you back the heads. They don't give you back. They don't give you back half the animal.
Right. Yeah, that's an issue, no matter where you are.
Well, you see, that's criminal. That's criminal, because that's my sheep's head. I want it. That's my. So but then there's these laws and regulations that say you can't do that if you want to sell it to the public. So in the end, we got round that by saying, do you want to co-own a pig?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to co-own a pig? Okay, give us some money now. It's a quarter of your pig's, quarter of your pig. That pig is a quarter yours, and you can bring it scraps, and you can do what you like with it because it's your pig. Because it's also illegal to feed them kitchen scraps as well, the pigs.
Interesting.
Illegal. You know, that's why pigs and chickens are there, because they're omnivores and they like
Recycling,
to
yeah,
eat, they like to eat everything that comes out of your kitchen, because we're omnivores. They'll
totally.
eat the leftovers, salty bits, you know, they don't mind. You give it to them, otherwise the rats are going to get it, because you're not allowed to compost it
Mhm.
either. All of these regulations,
Totally.
all it did was point out to me that the so-called authorities, the so-called powers that be, do not actually have our best interests at heart. And so we've got to just do it another way. We've just got to do it our own
Mhm.
way and ignore them,
Yeah.
and just not get involved with all their acts, laws, and statutes, which don't actually have any jurisdiction over us if we maintain our sovereignty and call ourselves men and women of the land, under common law, or the law of the land, or natural law, we call it, as opposed to admiralty law. So everyone needs to go away and just learn about that and do their research to find out that when your birth certificate is, you know, created, they're creating a fictional entity, a dead entity, a
Mm.
corporate entity. And that entity which is all written in capitals, because they capitalize upon that entity that's on that certificate, right? It's not actually you. It's not actually, sorry, not you, Meredith, but people, just talking to the people out there.
Sure.
It's not actually, I am flesh and blood Emma of the family Goodwin. I'm not this capitalized Emma Goodwin, right? So your acts, laws, and statutes don't have any jurisdiction over me. And we need to learn to stand up and say that to these entities who are trying to control us, and start to do what you're doing, which is going, you know, good farming practices that build soil, that culture and cultivate the microbiome of the soil as well, and to strengthen the web of life, to give us beautiful additions to the cycle of life with ingredients that we're honoring by enjoying, and to grow strong human beings, because I can see before my very eyes that we're taking such a hit as a species. Humans on the planet are taking a massive hit. The populations are going down, the birth rates are going down, the death rates going up, the sperm counts are going down. What do we need?
Right.
We need beef gonads and raw offal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think definitely like wherever people can be reached with this information and empowerment is good, you know, because it doesn't necessarily work unless we're all coming together in radical community in order to like make. So I think the story of your farm is a really great one. How amazing that you could create that community, that we're all doing that together, and that you could even walk away from it and it's still happening. Like that's so powerful. So the idea is like, yeah, we're not all going to individually do anything perfectly, but if we come together and work together and like advocate for each other and teach each other, then you
These
know
will be the
all the boats
lifeboats.
rise. Yeah,
These will
exactly.
be the lifeboats, and it'll
And
slowly spread.
in our own eco regions or in our own spaces where we're living, there's actually like a resilient infrastructure to support people eating well, even if like, you know, Joe Schmo over here is not participating in it now. If everything else fails, there it'll be for him, you know, like later on down the road. And so I think, yeah, that's the powerful promise of the work. You know, I do think that the regulation still it still affects those systems. You know, it's still a problem. There still are lots of issues with food freedom and our ability to like take back that power individually and collectively. There's a lot of people who aren't even safe enough to think about these things because the systems that have been created keep them in danger, or keep them in poverty, or keep them in situations. So I guess, yeah, the philosophy is like, if you have the safety and if you have the privilege to start dipping into this in any way that you can in order to create systems that will support everyone.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I hear you. I don't mean to you know, bash out the message, because it's scary when you see the big picture like
Totally.
that. It's really scary, and being in fear is the worst possible thing. You can't do anything when you're in fear. So
Right.
somehow, you know, through my trials and tribulations, I've felt the fear and done it anyway, and then come out the other side and gone, well, it's pointless feeling afraid. I'm just going to get on with it. You know?
Yeah, but I think we can also see, like looking back, you're saying like when I was toxic or whatever, you can see like what the incentive is for the powers that be to keep people sick, right? Like people who are sick are not empowered. People who are sick are not of their own mind. People who are sick are not able to fight or able to collaborate with each other, or like all the things that we need in order to actually not despair.
Yeah, and to survive and thrive in these troubled times, which we totally can. It never ceases to amaze me, actually, how remarkably resilient humans can be, considering all of the toxins in the food system and the indiscriminate spraying and the chemical corporation, blah, 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 blah. And still, we're still here going, yay, we could do this. Yeah, let's do that. I know. I mean, fermentation is such an easy, ridiculously easy thing. Even if you still are on the grains, which I don't advocate because I'm not into grains whatsoever, because I think they're microdosed. But even if you are, got some organic oats and you can't do without them, how about just soaking them in kefir the night before, which means they will be a little bit fermented in the morning. They'll already be soaked, and and that's just going to up your probiotic intake and break down some of those sugars for you. Or we can get the bugs to help us. We can actually,
I mean, that's actually the most human way of eating, because humans are not adapted to really digest grains. I mean, that's just the way that it is. And so we need some level of fermentation, which is why the tempeh and the sourdough and nixtamalization like have evolved ancestrally.
That's a big word. Like, what's that? Nixtamalization?
So that's like the fermentation of corn, essentially. And
can you say it again?
Nixtamalization.
So it's
yeah. So it's a process of like combining, I think really traditionally like ash with corn to alkalize it.
We're talking about like sweet corn or corn on the cob here. We're talking about cornmeal.
No, well, we're talking about essentially like masa. So making like tortillas are made with this kind of nixtamalized corn. And so, like if you think about animals that do eat grains, like chickens or cows, they all have a system within their body that actually will break those grains down for them. Like the chickens have the crop and the gizzard, and the cow has the rumen, right? The humans don't have those types of things. So we do need a little bit of assistance. And so
go on, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, cows aren't designed to eat grains, though. We force feed them grains. They're supposed to be eating leaves fibers and grasses and plant leaves. And they'll eat a few grains in the grass stems, maybe, but they're not designed to eat grains. And it's because we've been feeding them grains that then we have to give them routine antibiotics that have caused all this. Anyway, but the ruminants don't do grains, but the pigs and the chickens do. The omnivores do grains, don't they? The ruminants are stomachs are full of bacteria, aren't they? Just jam-packed full of bacteria to break down that cellulose. And our guts our stomach is full of acid, like a wolf. Yeah, more like a wolf. And so we need animal products and fats. We're omnivores. We can eat anything because we know how to properly prepare the grains, as you say. So isn't that like a 5-stage thing that, I want to say mixomatosis, but that's not the right word. You just told it me and I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in nixtamalization, but I would say look it up. Look it up there. So my friend Bill Schindler, who's an anthropologist, says really you should not be eating any corn that's not nixtamalized. Because corn is just so difficult to digest.
Right. And what do we eat all
day
long?
It's like loaded into the food supply.
And my gosh.
So if you think about it, it's really like it just tracks with that. Like everything that's being normalized and put into the mainstream is actually like the opposite, essentially, of like what
you might want to be looking in. My latest discoveries is with Sally Kay Norton, the oxalate specialist. I don't know if you're aware
I saw some of your interview with her, yeah.
I really like Sally, and it's been an eye-opener to me to discover these high oxalate foods and to then identify things that happened to me in my childhood to do with them, and sort of put 2 and 2 together, and then look at all of the shops that you go into where at the checkout, what can you find? Crisps, chips, you call them, potatoes, potato base, and every restaurant's got fries or chips, as we call them, and chocolate everywhere, chocolate. very high oxalate, and spinach, which was hybridized and sort of presented to us as a green sometime
Like
in the early
superfood. Yeah, totally.
1900s, which actually we shouldn't be eating at all, nor peanuts. Shouldn't really be eating peanuts. I think Rudolf Diesel, who invented the diesel engine, fueled his engine with peanut oil. And then as he was traveling across the water, this is one of the first things that opened my eyes, because I was looking at biofuels about 20 years ago, to open my eyes to the corruption and the terrible control totalitarian thing going on. Because Rudolf Diesel, this was like in the 1800s, I think, late 1800s, Rudolf Diesel was traveling from Europe over to America to bring his patents for his diesel engine on the boat that ran on peanut oil. And he mysteriously disappeared overboard. And his blueprints, I believe, were appropriated. And now we all run cars which have diesel engines for the petrochemical industry.
I do not know this story.
Yeah, man. Anyway, so yeah, peanuts. We shouldn't really be eating peanuts either. So this is what got me, when at the beginning of the pandemic, as I call it, we're going to finish up in a minute, but the beginning of the pandemic, oh no, I won't go down that road now. I won't bore everyone with it. And I just, is there anything else you'd like to tell everybody, Meredith, about how they can bring fermentation back into their kitchen for the first time, or, you know, where should they go? What should they do?
I would just say, like, think about something that you eat a lot of and start to like look into it and inquire and say, how can I take this back to like its raw, the raw whole food, and like think about whether my body's designed to like digest this raw whole food, and like what is done to process it into the foods that I enjoy, and then try to do that journey on your own. Like, try to make it yourself. Try to, you know, it's probably going to involve some fermentation process, you know, because if you think about lots of the foods that we eat, a lot of them are fermented, even though we may not know about it. And so what can you do, or what's something that you feel like is really central and necessary for your diet? How can you go on that journey? And then like reach out and just recognize that there is a huge community of creators and knowledge bearers that are there to support you in that endeavor. Like, if it's the fermentation school, it's the fermentation school, but if it's just YouTube at first, that's fine too, you know. But, you know, really just try to take that journey. And I think really that's when sort of the floodgates open and people start to realize, A, like this is accessible, B, this is empowering, C, this is better for me, and D, like what now can I expand into that feels like doable for me and important to me, you know.
That's it.
And then the rest is history.
Claim sovereignty and just get on with it. Do it. Yeah, do it. On the days where I haven't ingested live foods, I really know it. I really feel it. And I go, oh yeah, I didn't have my kefir eggnog today. Oh yeah, I'm going to have a kefir eggnog. Or I'll have a little shot of pineapple kombucha or something. Then the days when I don't have my ferments, I know it, you know. So it just really makes you feel so different to eat live foods, and everyone give it a try, man. Meredith, thank you so much for joining me. And
thanks for having me.
People are going to go to
well, go to fermentationschool.com, check out the classes that we have. Know that when you are participating in the class, you're not only getting knowledge, but you're supporting women who are the original ancient bearers of fermentation knowledge, and they are getting paid to give you that knowledge. Or if you're more interested in the meat side of things and like getting your head around like good ethical meat supply chains, check out my website, ethicalmeatbook.com. I'm getting ready to release that ebook, like I was saying, which is like 30 pages of just my whole journey through from being a vegan to being a butcher. And it's, I think it's going to be good.
I'm so excited. I just ordered your book. I'm really excited.
Yay. I hope you enjoy it.
I am. It's going to be a manual for me. I'm going to refer to it frequently. I'm going to enjoy it. Lots of love to you, Meredith. And
same to you.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye-bye.